It would be nice if at the top of the card it told us that this was a to-do list. How would we do that? Well, let's look at our components. Let's look at our cards. If we look in this code, we can add a title by just adding a mat card title. And our title will be things to do. Come back to learn Angular, and now we've got our things to do at the top of our card. Great. Still we're black. Why is our card styled as a darker color? Let's look and see what we've got. There are these amazing tools. If you right click on any element in your browser, you can look at it and see what's going on. So this mat card has a box shadow. It should make it stand out. So the background color on the mat card is that darker color, and the text color is white. And that's based on the theme. We've got the title, a subtitle. We need content. We need to tell it that we've got content in our card. So we'll add another card, mat card content, and we'll move our labels and our to-do stuff up into there. Save that. Everything's already compiled. All right. So we're at the point where we've got our card. It's not great looking. You know, if we added another to-do item, they're just running in these big long lists. Our checkboxes, well, that's one thing we can clean up right now. And it'd be nice if our checkboxes looked something like this, right? Where when we checked on them, they did cool stuff like this. You know, eventually we'll probably want to check all or an uncheck all, things like that. So it'd be really cool if we could do stuff like that. How do we do that? Again, we go look at the examples and we look in the code. Down here, we've got a section, and inside of the section, we've got mat checkbox. Sweet, super simple. So we'll add this mat checkbox. We'll bind it to our models, and we'll add a section. So we'll add a section. We can take off all of the mat stuff, right? Because if we look in our material, we don't need a label. The mat checkbox is going to take care of that for us. We just need the mat checkbox in our ng model. So we'll just change this to be mat dash checkbox. I'm going to take that out because we don't need it anymore. And we'll do the same here. Didn't catch it this time around. Okay. So now we've got our mat checkbox in. Looks like everything compiled fine. We inspect this, we've got the card title, got the card content. Is it my section? It's interesting. Did I delete some code? Well, let's add a break in here. I am missing the mat checkbox module. So sometimes when you add modules midstream, when you're coding, and I guess midstream may not be the right way to say it, but um, when you add modules, sometimes VS Code doesn't pick them up and won't do the autocomplete for you. Marcus asks, what are your thoughts on reactive forms versus template-driven forms? Saw a talk on the subject by Ward Bell at ngconf 2021 where he proved template-driven forms or promoted template-driven forms. I've mostly been doing reactive forms. So I saw the same talk, and woohoo, shout out to ngconf. Amazing conference, gets great speakers, a lot of amazing things there. I am excited to be attending this year. And I did see that talk by Ward Bell. I have been having this discussion with one of my friends for quite a while on the benefits of template versus reactive driven forms. Reactive versus template driven. My suggestion for you is to go with what you know, right? There are pros and cons to both, and make sure that you're picking the right tool for the right for what you're doing. If you're doing super simple forms, I highly recommend going template driven, and you'll get all the benefits that Ward Bell talked about in his talk. As things get more complicated and you start introducing more, I don't even know how to say it, like more complicated workflows, more complicated validations. As you start nesting forms, which may or may not be a good idea, there are a lot of things that can happen as as your application grows and gets more complicated. Reactive forms can win out, and I think both serve their purpose and both are good tools to use. It's like a lot of times I'll get asked on my opinion of Angular versus React versus Vue. Again, I'm biased in this one, but pick the tool that works for what you're trying to do. I've got a stream where I'm building a Sudoku game with Angular. Would I recommend you doing that on your own? Probably not. I don't think it's necessarily the best tool to do it, but it's fun to try and do it and see if we can, right? As you can see, this is based on our material theme, the colors that we've got that have been confusing me. By bringing in material, we're getting beautiful animations on our clicks, and things are starting to look better, right? Our application has consistent styling. And there will be more things that we can do in the future. As we go forward, it would be nice to be able to have multiple to-do lists, right? Maybe we have my weekend to-do list, and maybe we have my workday to-do list, and maybe we have my reading list and things like that. It'd be nice to be able to drag these between and things like that. So we'll explore things like that too. But right now, we're in a case where we've got something that looks okay. And it's got nice animations. People are going to be like, oh yeah, that looks nice. And your application is looking decent. So at this point, we're going to say that we have styled our application with material. And so now we need to address something that anybody who has done anything in any web framework ever was probably screaming at me over. So let's look at this horrible, horrible thing, and it hurt me to do it. But notice that we've got these to-do lists, 0, to-do list 1, and if I go into the component and I add another one, and I say this one's true, and we'll call this style with angular material. Right, I've added one, but it's not going to show up unless I go in and do a whole bunch of silly things. So how can we fix this? Well, first of all, it would be nice if we had a div around our checkboxes, so that our checkboxes would automatically wrap. The other thing is it would be nice if we could iterate through the array. And using that iteration, put these things out there. The other thing that I'm doing that isn't a good idea is my to-do list is just inline objects, right? And there's nothing protecting me from accidentally saying finished false or finished true. And, you know, there's nothing that's going to complain about this. So let's fix that up first. I like to keep all of my models together in a folder. And the reason for that is that when I'm looking for a model, I know where to look for it. So inside of here, we're going to create a to-do list item. And my to-do list item is just going to export an interface. And that interface is going to have done. That's going to be a Boolean. And I need to name the interface, otherwise it's just going to complain. And a description. And that's just going to be a string. So now I can say that to-do list is an array of to-do list items. I can bring that in from my model. And now done or finished is highlighted as being bad because I didn't provide done and finished doesn't exist on there. So now I get strong typing. And this is something that I recommend when you're working in Angular. You know, this is a string. It's easily inferred. You don't need to necessarily come in here and put in type string. You can leave that up to you or your team. As it is, the ESLint rules I have in place automatically say, yeah, you shouldn't do that. To-do list item, on the other hand, we want to make sure that our items come in, but we want to make sure that this is consistent throughout our application. The other big benefit to that is that now, when I hover inside of here, because of the Angular template parser, it'll be able to tell me that done should be a Boolean. And, you know, if I change this to finished, it will tell me that, hey, that doesn't exist on this object. Or it should. It's probably because I'm doing something really dumb by indexing the array as is. So let's fix that. First thing we want to do is we want to wrap these with a div so that they automatically wrap themselves. We don't have to keep adding BR in between them. Inside of this div, we're going to add a new directive is what it's called. And directives allow us to add extra functionality to HTML tags. Instead of creating a whole component, we can compose much more complicated components by adding directives to our HTML tags, and those directives can modify anything about that HTML tag and allow us to create better, just better components and make our application better. The star before ng4 tells us that this is a structural directive. And structural directives are special directives that will modify the structure of the DOM when they are run. One thing to be aware of is that you can only have one structural directive on an item at a time, on a tag at a time. So if I try to add an ngIf, it will complain, and I think something is broken. It should complain. Because this is not valid. Having an ngIf and an ng4 on the same should not work. But we're gonna use this ng4 to do for each to-do of to-dos list. We're going to add a div, and inside of that div, we're going to add an item. So this to-do of to-dos list, how do we tell it that this checkbox needs to be bound to something? Well, the nice thing is that we get the actual object, so we can just call it to-do.done, because we're declaring a variable called to-do from our to-dos list array. We can also, inside of here, instead of directly accessing the array, we can now use the description, and here we can access done again. And it's not to-dos, it's to-do. And now everything's compiled. And look, now we've got all of our items. And as we check them, they're changing. They're changing appropriately. But you know, this to-do list isn't very useful at all to a user. One of the big things we're missing, and it is a big thing, is that there's no way to add anything to this to-do list. As it stands, to be able to add anything, unless you're a coder, you need to contact your friend who wrote the application for you. They need to find time, they need to come in, and they need to add a new to-do list item, which is not useful at all. So how would we go about adding a new to-do list? Well, inside of this card, let's add a new section. Let's add the ability to add a new item. How would we do that? First of all, we're going to need an input, right? So let's make sure that we're staying consistent within material. So let's go look at our material, go back to our components, and see if we can find an input. We've got dividers, dialogues, date pickers, expansion panels. Oh, form field, sweet. Yes, we want this. Let's look at our examples. So we've got the legacy, we've got a standard, we've got a fill form, and an output form. So let's pick one. I personally like the fill form. You know, you can still tell what you're supposed to do, but we don't have to add labels to it. So let's put an input on the field or on the form. We're going to add a label, and that label is going to be what displays in the placeholder and moves up. Then we'll add our input with a placeholder in it. We don't really need the icon or the hint. We'll skip those for now, but let's copy this over. So inside of this section, got our mat form field, got our mat label. Our label is something you need to do. We're going to add our mat input. Our placeholder is going to be something to do. Sure, we'll take the type equals. I don't care about the type equals text. Take out our mat icon and our mat hint. Sometimes you have to do this. You have to restart the Angular language service every once in a while. That solved it. So when we originally added Angular 14, I think it stopped the Angular language service, and that's why my templates aren't showing stuff. Because now if I hover over to do equals done, I can now see that it's from a to-do list item dot done, and it should be a Boolean. And my description should be a string. And if I change this to be dot finished, it's going to tell me that it doesn't exist. So every once in a while, and I don't know why this happens, the nice thing about this is that now we know that mat form field and mat label aren't available to us. So now we can come in here and we can add the mat form. Is it the mat forms module and the mat input module? You know what, rather than trying to muddle through this, I should follow best practices. Make sure I'm looking at my API. So I need my mat form field module. That comes from Angular material form field. All right. So now if we go back to our component.html, everything looks good. Okay, so things are all compiled. And now we've got this something to do down here at the bottom. And it does nothing. Great, so now I can type something in, but it doesn't do anything. The other thing about it is it's not bound to anything, so typing watch stream doesn't do anything at all for me. What do we do about that? Well, we know we can bind to this using, but I don't feel like I am getting the styling. Like the styling is off, right? Because if we look at this input and we look at material, it should look like this, right? With a slight hover. And I don't know if you can see that on the stream, but when I'm hovering, there should be things going on when I click in it. And I think I am missing something from the setup. So let's go back. I think I didn't get the styles imported. And that's why everything's looking horrible. And the reason it's not being caught is because I don't have the mat input module like you said. See if it's figured it out yet. Nope. have to look at learn 8. Oh, there we go. Man, that is incredibly hard to see. I should have picked a different theme. That purple on that dark background just doesn't work very well. In the beginning, when we were using REM, the reason we were using REM specifically for what we're seeing now, that as we resize it, the size of our margins and padding and stuff is going to resize according to the font, which is a nice thing to have happen. So we've got our input. One thing, it doesn't look really good. Do I have my Angular material set to a dark theme maybe? It is purplegreen.css that sets the background to be that dark. What we need to do is add a button so that we can add new things to the to-do list. The other thing that I don't think we want here is this button is right on the to-do list. What would be nice is if it was down lower in the card. So let's do that stuff. Go back to our HTML. And this is just something that you get used to doing as you're building things in a. Let me finish what I'm doing right now so that I can gather my train of thought. Where I was going with that, as I was trying to think, was that you just get used to as you're building a UI. The approach that I tend to take is I just throw a bunch of stuff onto the page, and then I start refining the design from there to look like what people expect it to look like. For example, this something you need to do should probably extend the width of the bottom, and we'll clean that up. The other thing is that there should be a button here that we'll add, but you're just going to be